Urgent news! From the heart of the American industrial and agricultural landscape, the giant John Deere, a name synonymous with farming and American manufacturing, has reportedly taken a bold and decisive step that sent powerful reverberations through the corridors of power in Washington and triggered significant agitation in financial markets from the trading floors of Wall Street to stock exchanges across the globe. What at first glance might have sounded like a simple strategic expansion movement by a global corporation quickly escalated and revealed itself to be the pinnacle of a much deeper and more significant clash. This is a conflict that reportedly goes far beyond corporate figures and balance sheets, directly addressing sensitive and fundamental issues such as international trade policies, long-standing political alliances, and perhaps most crucially, the very future of the labor force in a rapidly changing world. Without any preamble, idle talk, or vague promises, the company reportedly made a definitive and concrete announcement. It would significantly expand its manufacturing operations to Mexico. This is reportedly not a distant plan for the future, nor a hypothetical idea under consideration. It is presented as a concrete business decision already underway and rapidly progressing. A new manufacturing unit has reportedly begun construction and is scheduled to go into operation by the year 2026. And the reaction from the highest levels of U.S. government explosive. President Donald Trump reportedly did not waste a single moment reacting to the news. He was reportedly irritated and directly detonated, strongly criticized the company live on television, publicly calling the decision an act of treason. And then he reportedly went further, issuing a stark threat to impose a staggering 200% tariff rate on each and every John Deere product manufactured outside the American borders that attempts to re-enter the U.S. market. The message from the president was reportedly clear and unambiguous. If you take jobs from here from America, we will ensure that your products only come back here at an incredibly high political and economic price. The media reportedly fell upon the story with intense coverage, amplifying the conflict. Investors across the globe reportedly held their breath, bracing for volatility. And rural America reportedly watched in shock and disbelief, finding itself trapped in the middle of a political and economic war between the man they often vote for and the company they fundamentally depend on to farm their land. This was reportedly not just another news headline. It was a complex set of accounts, a calculation of necessity and consequence. Deere's decision to expand production in Mexico was reportedly not taken lightly by its leadership. With the boardroom doors reportedly closed, council members and executives discussed and debated this significant movement for months, analyzing data, reviewing projections, and operating under intense pressure. Because reports indicate the numbers simply did not lie about the increasing challenges of manufacturing in the United States. Equipment manufacturing costs in the United States had reportedly skyrocketed. Supply chains were reportedly congested. Labor was reportedly scarce in key areas, and international competitors were reportedly faster, cheaper, and more efficient in their production processes. Companies like Kubota in Japan and Mahindra in India had reportedly already perfected low-cost manufacturing models throughout Asia, gaining a competitive edge. Deere was reportedly running behind, facing increasing cost pressures and losing ground. And the strategic solution they reportedly identified: Mexico, a country reportedly offering labor costs up to 70% lower than in the U.S., a qualified workforce, and crucial logistical access to the agricultural markets in Latin America, which are currently undergoing significant expansion. But the decision reportedly wasn't just about the payroll savings. It was framed as a matter of operational survival and resilience. The ports of the United States were reportedly congested, causing delays. Internal transport within the U.S. was reportedly unstable, leading to unpredictable delivery times. raw materials were reportedly delayed in reaching U.S. factories. And each interruption, each delay cost John Deere valuable time and significant money, impacting their ability to deliver products to farmers when needed. A new factory in Mexico reportedly offered flexibility, agility, and proximity to the agricultural economies that are growing the fastest in the world, countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia, where agriculture is not just growing, but reportedly exploding. So based on these calculations, Deere reportedly made the difficult but strategic choice. The plan involves an investment of $55 million for a state-of-the-art facility in Mexico specifically designed to manufacture medium-sized utility tractors and compact utility tractors on tracks. These machines, the company reportedly identified, cater directly to the segment of the agricultural market that is growing the most rapidly: small and medium-sized rural properties. These are farms that increasingly need technology efficiency and agility in their operations, and above all, accessibility in terms of cost and availability. For Deere's leadership, this decision was reportedly not an act of betrayal against the U.S. It was presented as a necessary business strategy to compete effectively in a changing global market. But for President Trump, the reaction was reportedly something personal and highly public. Speaking at a rally in a park in Iowa, a state deeply tied to agriculture, he reportedly publicly criticized John Deere, saying they had spat in the face of American workers. He reportedly continued his fiery rhetoric, stating, "Do you want to manufacture our machines elsewhere? All right, but they will not bring them back without paying dearly for it." This rhetoric reportedly served as powerful fuel for his electoral base, resonating with voters in rural areas. But it was, reportedly also, something else: a clear warning. A warning for Deere itself, for other manufacturers considering similar moves, and for the broader market about the potential political consequences of corporate decisions. Trump was reportedly drawing a line in the sand, and anyone who crossed it, it seemed, would pay a political price in his view. But the company reportedly did not retreat in the face of this strong political reaction. There were reportedly no apologies issued, nor any apparent attempt to reverse the decision. Instead, Deere reportedly issued a balanced but clear and firm response. They highlighted that the expansion in Mexico would affect less than 5% of their total production base in North America. They emphasized that the core of their business, large tractors, harvesters, and combine harvesters, would continue to be manufactured in their long-standing facilities in Iowa, Illinois, and other factories within the United States. They were not abandoning America, their statement implied. They were adapting their global manufacturing footprint to compete more effectively in the global market, including serving rapidly growing international markets. And then, reportedly, came the response from investors. Wall Street reportedly remained firm, demonstrating confidence in Deere's strategic move. After a slight initial dip following the political reaction, Deere's shares reportedly recovered. Analysts from prominent financial institutions like Bloomberg and Goldman Sachs reportedly classified the decision as smart, focused on the future, and necessary for the company's long-term viability. The logic from a business perspective was reportedly seen as unquestionable. The growth in agricultural demand was reportedly migrating geographically to the south towards Latin America. Therefore, production needed to follow this market shift to be efficient, and tariffs motivated by political reasons. They might even cause some short-term pain or disruption, but analysts reportedly believed they would not be enough to fundamentally divert a long-term growth strategy designed for decades. In fact, some industry insiders reportedly believe that President Trump's threats, ironically, might in a way even be helping Deere's competitive position. The reasoning is that if the threatened tariffs are applied, they will affect all foreign producers importing agricultural machinery into the U.S., And Deere, even with the expansion in Mexico, still manufactures the majority of its products for the U.S. market in its established facilities within the United States. Competitors like Mahindra Yammer and Kubota, however, reportedly do not have such a large U.S. manufacturing base. They primarily manufacture their products elsewhere and import them. So, ironically, the impact of tariffs on imported goods could reportedly be even worse for Deere's international rivals, potentially giving Deere a relative advantage in the U.S. market despite its Mexico expansion. But according to the report, none of this nuanced business logic seemed to matter in the public opinion tribunal. Voters in rural areas, especially in politically deciding states, reportedly began to split in their reactions. In Facebook groups, online forums, and local radio programs, the conflict reportedly unfolded like a family fight, polarizing communities. On the one hand were those who defended Deere as an essential company vital to their livelihoods, simply trying to adapt to challenging global economic realities and compete effectively. On the other hand were those who demanded absolute loyalty and domestic focus, viewing the decision to expand overseas as a direct slap in the face to American workers and national pride. Trump's allies in Congress reportedly thickened the chorus of criticism. State senators in heavily Republican states with agricultural bases reportedly released statements publicly asking Deere to reconsider its decision. Committees in the House, such as the Chamber's Agriculture Committee, reportedly scheduled hearings to examine the implications. And the White House reportedly came to consider opening an investigation into government contracts with Deere, reportedly aiming to ensure that no penny of taxpayer money was inadvertently intended for imports of Deere products manufactured abroad. In the background of this public and political drama, Deere lobbyists reportedly took full action in Washington and state capitals. They reportedly met with trade authorities, presented detailed arguments to congressional advisors, and reminded everyone involved that John Deere is reportedly not just a brand name for farm equipment. It is presented as a cornerstone of U.S. agriculture. They argued that rural infrastructure fundamentally depends on its equipment, and that banning it or taxing it to extinction through prohibitive tariffs would ultimately punish the very farmers whose interests the administration claims to protect. And yet, despite this lobbying effort, President Trump reportedly increased the bet, reiterating his threat in a commission meeting in Ohio. He reportedly cited Deere 5 times in his speech, specifically promising to impose import rates so high that the company would never forget the consequences of its decision. The crowd at the rally reportedly reacted enthusiastically to this strong stance. But Deere was reportedly not alone in this situation. Other corporations across various industries were reportedly watching closely. If Deere publicly backed down in the face of political pressure, the message sent to the business world would reportedly be clear. No company could operate globally and make strategic decisions without risking significant political punishment and interference. But if Deere held its position and successfully weathered the storm, it could reportedly set a precedent, a new line drawn where business leaders make decisions based on economic data and long-term strategy rather than solely on political threats issued during campaign rallies. And so far, according to the report, Deere remained firm in its decision. Meanwhile, the company reportedly wasn't just thinking about where it manufactures. It was intensely focused on what it manufactures, looking towards the future of agriculture itself. The future of agriculture, the report suggests, is reportedly not defined by traditional national identities, red, white, or green. It is increasingly electric, autonomous, and intelligent. Deere's investment in automation and advanced technology is reportedly huge and ongoing. Its autonomous tractors already reportedly operate in U.S. fields without human drivers, demonstrating the rapid pace of technological change. Its software division reportedly develops artificial intelligence systems capable of managing entire farms from a tablet. Drones reportedly identify pests from the air. Machines apply defensive measures with centimetric precision, and data flows in real time, optimizing every aspect of farming. And perhaps most impressively, these advanced machines reportedly do not care where they were physically built. They only care about the speed at which they can work and the efficiency they can achieve in the field. Which the report argues brings us back to the myth that President Trump reportedly continues to sell the promise to bring back manufacturing jobs. This promise, while seemingly powerful and guaranteeing applause at rallies, reportedly does not hold true in the world of modern highly automated manufacturing. Because even if Deere were to hypothetically transfer all its factories back to Iowa tomorrow, the jobs created would not, for the most part, go to people. They would go to machines and automated systems. Automation, the report asserts, is not fundamentally about politics. It is about mathematics and technological progress. According to Oxford Economics, up to 20 million industrial jobs globally could reportedly disappear by 2030, specifically because of the increasing use of robots and automation, and this trend is reportedly only accelerating. Deere is reportedly not avoiding the American labor force in an old sense. It is facing a future in which work as we have known it in traditional manufacturing roles will fundamentally no longer exist in the same form. Under this perspective, the transition to expansion in Mexico is reportedly seen by some not only as an economic decision, but as an evolutionary one. It is presented as a sign that the era defined by geography and location is gradually giving rise to the era of technology and automation as the primary drivers of manufacturing. And that the report concludes is precisely what makes this entire conflict so symbolic and representative of broader global shifts. On the one hand stands a populist president reportedly promising to bring back a world of traditional manufacturing jobs that may no longer exist in its past form. On the other stands a global company reportedly preparing for a world that has already arrived, one defined by automation and globalized supply chains. It is framed as nostalgia versus innovation, emotion versus execution. And somewhere tragically in the middle is the American farmer caught between these powerful forces, simply trying to understand who to trust and how to secure the necessary equipment to feed the world. A shockwave, hitting the very bedrock of American agriculture and industry. 6 months into a new administration's tumultuous second term, a sweeping package of tariffs aimed at reshaping America's position in global trade was unveiled, and its impact has been swift and profound. While the announcement reportedly reverberated across numerous industries, few felt the tremors as acutely or publicly as Case IH, the storied agricultural machinery division of CNH Industrial. In a sobering address that garnered significant attention from both employees and shareholders alike, Chief Executive Officer Garrett Marks reportedly disclosed that the company was facing immense and unsustainable financial strain. He painted a stark picture of rapidly rising production costs, shrinking profit margins, and the painful, seemingly unavoidable necessity to shutter U.S. factories and relocate significant portions of operations overseas. This moment, according to industry observers, marked a dramatic and potentially irreversible inflection point for a brand that has long been synonymous with American farming and the machines that drive it, and its repercussions are expected to extend far beyond assembly lines and corporate balance sheets. Marks reportedly began his address with a candid and direct assessment of Case IH's financial health in the wake of the new trade policies. Historically, the company had carefully balanced its domestic manufacturing operations with its export sales, strategically leveraging its U.S. capacity not only to serve local American customers, but also to compete effectively in global markets. That long-standing equilibrium, he explained, snapped abruptly when the administration's tariffs imposed steep duties specifically on imported steel and aluminum. These are critical inputs, essential raw materials for the manufacturing of heavy agricultural machinery like tractors and combines. Simultaneously, the tariffs reportedly triggered almost immediate retaliatory measures from key trade partners around the world, further complicating the economic environment. The direct result, Marx detailed, was a severe squeeze on raw materials costs that Case IH reportedly could not absorb indefinitely without jeopardizing the company's financial viability. He described how the company's cost of goods sold had surged by a significant margin, reportedly nearly 20%, within just a single quarter. This dramatic increase directly eroded profit margins that were already reportedly under pressure due to fluctuating global commodity prices for agricultural products and a recent dip in equipment financing activity among farmers. As the increasing weight of these rising costs and the pervasive uncertainty regarding market access mounted company leadership was reportedly confronted with a stark and difficult reality: continue losing a significant amount of money on virtually every machine sold, even potentially those domestically, or seek more favorable and cost-effective production environments abroad to stabilize operations. The decision to close long-standing U.S. manufacturing sites reportedly did not come lightly. These factories, many of which had operated for decades and employed generations of skilled workers, were deeply integrated into the economic and social fabric of rural communities across the Midwest. Marx reportedly acknowledged the profound human toll the closures would take, expressing deep regret and empathy for the families who would face unemployment and the disruption of their livelihoods. Yet he reportedly underscored that, without significant structural changes to address the cost imbalances, the entire American division of Case IH risked a more catastrophic collapse. By relocating production to lower-cost facilities in Europe and Asia, particularly in regions where tariffs on American-made machinery had been minimal or entirely non-existent, Case IH reportedly aimed to stabilize pricing for its machines globally and maintain its competitive edge. This strategic shift, Marx explained, would preserve the company's ability to compete effectively in key international markets, from the vast soybean fields of South America to Australia's sprawling pastures. In these critical agricultural regions, delays in equipment availability or significant cost hikes due to tariffs could have jeopardized farmers' crucial planting seasons and harvest cycles, impacting global food production. International stakeholders who had watched trade tensions escalate over the past year reportedly braced for deeper and broader disruptions beyond just the U.S. market. For countries heavily reliant on imported agricultural equipment from brands like Case IH, the company's move signaled potential supply shortages and increased price volatility for essential machinery. Smaller dealerships in regions like Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa, already operating on thin margins and limited credit lines, reportedly faced a narrowing window to secure necessary tractors and combines ahead of critical planting seasons. Some began actively exploring alternative brands with more stable supply chains, while others reportedly considered relying on second-hand equipment markets, an imperfect solution that carried inherent risks related to reliability and ongoing maintenance challenges. In regions where the adoption of advanced farming technology was still nascent, this shift reportedly threatened to stall modernization efforts, potentially having downstream effects on local food security and long-term economic development. Within the United States, reactions to the announcement were equally charged and varied, depending on perspective. Agricultural economists pointed to the announcement as stark confirmation that the Trump administration's tariff strategy, explicitly intended to protect and invigorate American industry, had in fact backfired on a significant scale. Instead of bolstering domestic manufacturing and employment, they argued, it reportedly drove one of the sector's most venerable and established names to export jobs and investment outside the country. Critics of the tariffs argued vehemently that when input costs for manufacturing escalate so significantly, downstream industries and the broader rural economies that depend on them suffer in tangible ways that ripple throughout the supply chain and labor force. Farmers already grappling with weather-related production risks and volatile global commodity markets now reportedly confronted the added prospect of significantly pricier equipment and longer lead times for necessary machinery. Many expressed frustration at being caught in the crossfire of complex geopolitical maneuvering, feeling their ability to plant and harvest efficiently was suddenly contingent on policy decisions made thousands of miles away in Washington. For Case IH's U.S. workforce, the announcement ushered in a period of intense uncertainty and hardship. Labor unions representing the factory-based jobs, traditionally a strong and vocal advocate for American manufacturing, employment, mobilized quickly to lobby both company leadership and federal lawmakers. They reportedly demanded assurances of adequate severance packages, comprehensive retraining programs for displaced workers, and concrete commitments to new manufacturing initiatives, ideally focused on emerging agricultural technologies like precision seeding equipment or autonomous machinery to create future domestic opportunities. Yet the stark financial figures CEO Marks presented reportedly left little room for widespread optimism regarding near-term domestic investment. With profit warnings already issued for upcoming quarters, capital for new domestic projects was reportedly scarce. While corporate executives reportedly voiced a desire to maintain a foothold in the U.S. and explore future possibilities, they made clear that any potential future investments would reportedly hinge on a more predictable and stable trade environment and substantial incentives from state or federal governments to offset costs. On Wall Street, the stock market reaction was swift and negative. Shares of CNH Industrial Case IH's parent company dipped sharply on the day of Mark's announcement, reflecting investor anxiety over the company's shrinking North American manufacturing footprint and the broader implications for the U.S. manufacturing sector as a whole. Analysts reportedly downgraded ratings for the stock, cautioning that Case IH's challenges were symptomatic of a larger worrying trend: multinational firms actively re-evaluating their U.S. operations in light of trade policy volatility. Some analysts even reportedly speculated that the company might pursue mergers or strategic alliances to bolster its global capacity and financial resilience in a changing landscape. In the short term, however, immediate attention turned to the operational balance sheet. Orders from U.S. distributors were reportedly put on hold as they awaited clarity on pricing and delivery schedules for future equipment, creating a feedback loop that threatened to deepen the downturn in equipment sales domestically. Beyond the immediate financial upheaval, Mark's revelation reportedly provoked a deeper and more fundamental debate about the future direction of American industrial strategy. Proponents of free trade lamented the rise of protectionist measures and warned that tit-for-tat tariffs between nations stoked global economic fragmentation and instability. They pointed to Case IH's situation as a cautionary tale, illustrating how seemingly well-intentioned efforts to gain leverage over geopolitical adversaries through trade policy could inadvertently unsettle domestic supply chains and fundamentally undermine the very industries they aim to defend. Conversely, supporters of the administration argued that the trade tensions and resulting disruptions were necessary to correct perceived imbalances in existing trade agreements and compel trading partners to negotiate more favorable terms for American exporters and intellectual property holders. They framed Case IH's predicament as an unfortunate but arguably inevitable recalibration in pursuit of perceived long-term strategic gains, suggesting that other manufacturers might ultimately benefit once new trade deals were successfully struck. Farm advocacy groups, which had previously lobbied the administration for tariff relief, specifically on agricultural inputs necessary for production, reportedly renewed their appeals with fresh urgency. They highlighted how farming's notoriously thin profit margins left producers ill-equipped to shoulder additional tariff-driven costs for essential equipment. They warned that sustained equipment price inflation could accelerate consolidation in the agriculture sector, making it harder for smaller family farms to compete. Smaller family farms, they argued, were most vulnerable to these cost pressures, a trend that would erode rural communities and concentrate production in the hands of a few large agribusinesses. In response to these concerns, some lawmakers reportedly proposed targeted relief measures, including rebates on machinery purchases for farmers or tax credits for domestic capital investments by manufacturers. Yet these proposals reportedly faced an uphill battle in a politically polarized Congress where partisan gridlock and competing budget priorities limited the feasibility of sweeping relief packages. Amid the political tumult, Case IH competitors reportedly watched closely, weighing opportunities to gain market share in the United States. Brands that had invested heavily in domestic manufacturing capacity touted their ability to weather the tariff storm, though analysts cautioned that no company in the industry was entirely immune to the broader cost escalations affecting raw materials globally. Others reportedly accelerated efforts to expand their service and aftermarket divisions, betting that repair and maintenance of existing equipment would become an even more critical revenue stream as farmers delayed new purchases due to price or availability concerns. In parallel, some international rivals reportedly explored the feasibility of establishing new plants in Mexico or Canada, nations within the North American trade bloc that were often exempt from many of the U.S. tariffs. This shift reportedly hinted at a reconfiguration of regional supply networks, with firms seeking to sidestep punitive duties without sacrificing proximity to key markets in North America. As Case IH reportedly prepared to wind down operations at its U.S. factories, the company also reportedly faced complex logistical challenges. Transferring specialized machinery production overseas required retooling new plants, training workforces on proprietary assembly processes, and recalibrating quality control to match long-established American standards. Marcel Box, Case IH's global operations chief, reportedly estimated that the extensive transition would take at least 18 months, during which global production volumes would temporarily decline. This lull risked exacerbating inventory shortages for dealers and leaving farmers without timely access to critical equipment during crucial seasons. To mitigate the impact, Case IH announced contingency plans, including temporary partnerships with contract manufacturers and expedited shipping protocols. But the logistical headwinds reportedly underscored the interconnectedness of global supply chains and the inherent difficulty of de-risking effectively against sudden policy shocks. Financial analysts now reportedly project that Case IH's restructuring will reshape the company's long-term profit profile. While the move abroad reportedly promises lower unit costs in the medium term due to reduced labor and material expenses, the upfront capital expenditures for building new facilities and the necessary write-downs of U.S. assets will weigh significantly on near-term earnings. Shareholders reportedly face a choice: endure short-term pain for the prospect of stabilized margins down the line, or seek compensation for near-term losses. Marx reportedly appealed directly to investors to embrace the strategic pivot, stressing that without this decisive action, the alternative would be a protracted losing battle against rising costs and shrinking market share. His message was clear, although the decision hurt deeply. It was presented as the only viable path to preserving Case IH's global competitiveness in a fractured trade environment. In boardrooms in Riyadh, Sao Paulo, and New Delhi, major agricultural firms reportedly took note of the upheaval at Case IH. The event highlighted the precarious balance between national policies and corporate strategy in a globalized world. For nations, striving to modernize their agriculture sectors, the availability and affordability of advanced machinery were reportedly now inextricably intertwined with the geopolitics of steel, aluminum, and trade policy. Governments began reassessing their own domestic incentives, from subsidizing local manufacturing to negotiating protective measures for strategic industries like agriculture. The ripple effects extended into global commodity markets as equipment shortages threatened to constrain planting and harvesting schedules, potentially tightening global grain supplies and influencing prices on international exchanges. Underpinning all these dynamics was a profound lesson in an era of escalating geopolitical tensions. No supply chain is immune to disruption. Case IH's decision to exit U.S. manufacturing represented a watershed moment not only for the company and its employees, but for the broader ecosystem of farmers, dealers, suppliers, and policymakers. It served as a stark illustration of how rapidly shifting trade policies can upend long-standing commercial arrangements, forcing even venerable brands to make wrenching adjustments. As Marx concluded his address, he reportedly invoked the spirit of innovation and resilience that had long defined Case IH, vowing that despite the pain of relocation, the company would emerge stronger, better positioned to serve farmers across the globe. Whether that promise would materialize, reportedly, depended not only on Case IH's execution, but on the broader course of international trade policy, an unfolding saga whose next chapters remained unwritten. The shockwaves from Case IH's announcement reportedly continued to reverberate far beyond the initial cost analyses and factory closures. As the company began to realign its global footprint, attention shifted toward the broader consequences for technological innovation in agriculture. Autonomous machinery, precision-guided implements, and digital farm management platforms had been heralded as the future of farming. Case IH itself had invested heavily in research and development, seeking to integrate telematics, AI-driven diagnostics, and satellite-enabled variable rate application into its next generation of tractors and combines. Yet with key R&D centers still reportedly located in the United States, questions arose about whether tariff-induced pressures would curtail those investments or force a geographic shift in technological leadership. Executives reportedly acknowledged the tension between preserving the U.S. innovation ecosystem and managing near-term financial imperatives. While moving mass production overseas could yield immediate cost savings, relocating R&D operations posed greater complexity. Engineering teams often clustered around specialized testing facilities in the Midwest and Northeast benefited from proximity to academic partners' trial fields and supplier networks. Any disruption reportedly risked slowing the pace of development and creating gaps in intellectual property protections. In private strategy sessions, Case IH leaders reportedly weighed scenarios ranging from maintaining small-scale U.S. research labs with limited headcount to establishing new innovation hubs in Europe where subsidies and incentives for agricultural technology were on the rise. This prospect reportedly underscored divergent approaches to fostering agtech worldwide. In countries like Germany, France, and the Netherlands, governments had launched competitive grant programs for robotics and smart farming startups. These initiatives were reportedly designed to keep European farmers at the forefront of mechanization, and they reportedly offered a counterpoint to the U.S. model of largely private sector-driven research. Should Case IH pivot its innovation base to Europe, it might gain access to these public funds but risk ceding its influence over the trajectory of agricultural robotic standards. Conversely, maintaining a significant research presence stateside would increasingly depend on securing carve-outs or exemptions from the very tariffs that had set this chain of events into motion. A parallel debate reportedly unfolded among institutional investors who had prioritized ESG, environmental, social, and governance considerations in their portfolios. Case IH's strategic shift reportedly struck at the heart of social concerns, particularly around employment and community sustainability. The loss of manufacturing jobs in rural America could reportedly exacerbate population decline, reduce tax bases, and weaken local healthcare and education systems. Socially conscious funds had engaged directly with CNH Industrial's board, urging the company to explore alternative cost-saving measures, such as automation of assembly lines, partial component localization, or enhanced workforce retraining programs before resorting to full-scale plant closures. Yet as the financial forecasts darkened, even proponents of phased approaches reportedly conceded that bolder restructuring might be unavoidable. From an environmental standpoint, the move reportedly raised both challenges and opportunities. Transporting heavy machinery components across oceans inevitably increases carbon footprints, conflicting with the industry's push toward sustainability. Critics argued that offshoring production would undermine Case IH's commitments to reducing greenhouse gas emissions throughout its value chain. Supporters countered that newly built overseas facilities could embody greener manufacturing, leveraging renewables' heavy grids and more efficient logistics technologies. Indeed, the company had already identified several potential plant sites in Scandinavia where hydroelectric power and district heating systems could sharply lower emissions per unit produced. In Asia, too, factories could reportedly integrate more advanced emissions controls and water recycling processes, upgrades that older U.S. plants had never fully implemented. Beyond manufacturing, the tariffs' ripple effects reportedly touched the supplier ecosystem. Case IH relied on hundreds of Tier 1 and Tier 2 partners, steel fabricators, hydraulic system specialists, engine producers, many of which were small or family-owned businesses. These suppliers had calibrated their operations to serve U.S. plants investing in tooling and inventory to meet just-in-time schedules. With the factories shuttering, they reportedly faced sudden demand collapse, threatening solvency. Some attempted to pivot to other industries: defense, automotive construction, but found themselves competing against entrenched players with long-term contracts. At the same time, new suppliers in Europe and Asia reportedly scrambled to upscale capacity and master Case IH's exacting quality standards, an initiative that required extensive certification and training programs lasting months or even years. Regional chambers of commerce and economic development agencies in rural America responded with urgency. They reportedly lobbied state governments for industrial retention grants and lobbied the federal administration for tariff waivers tied to domestic manufacturing of agricultural machinery. Legislators from Farm Belt districts drafted bipartisan letters emphasizing the importance of capital equipment production to national food security and economic resilience. Yet in the polarized climate of Washington politics, such appeals often stalled in committees or became attached to broader legislative wrangling over spending caps and debt ceilings. The prospect of targeted relief for a single company or even an entire sector became entangled in wider battles over the scope of government intervention and the trade-offs inherent in protectionism versus free market principles. On university campuses and in think tanks, scholars dissected the Case IH case for lessons about supply chain risk management. Papers explored how diversification of manufacturing locations could serve as a hedge against policy shifts, but also how complexity and coordination costs rose with each added production site. Simulations indicated that highly integrated supply networks, while efficient under stable conditions, proved brittle when confronted with sudden tariff announcements. These findings reportedly fed into a broader reassessment among multinational corporations, prompting some to pursue China Plus One strategies and establish nimble modular manufacturing cells that could be reconfigured or relocated on short notice. However, the capital investments required for truly flexible manufacturing robots, digital twins, Rapid tooling systems were substantial, and not every firm could shoulder those costs without sacrificing margins. As the financial year drew to a close, Case IH's board reportedly confronted a set of agonizing choices. The initial round of factory closures and staff reductions alleviated some immediate pressures but left the company under-resourced in North America. Plans were drafted for incremental capacity additions in a handful of European and Asian sites, accompanied by a phased ramp-up of component supply agreements. Yet these plans reportedly remained contingent on key assumptions that tariffs would hold steady, that foreign customers would not retaliate further, and that currency exchange rates would not swing unfavorably. Every assumption carried its own risks. A further escalation in trade conflicts could prompt additional tariffs on agricultural machinery itself, a potential blow that could undo the benefits of offshoring production. In parallel, Case IH's executive leadership explored diversification strategies to reduce dependence on tractor and combined sales. Agricultural equipment, leasing, telematics, subscription services, and after-sales parts bundles were identified as higher-margin, more resilient revenue streams. The idea was to shift toward a services-oriented model where stable recurring income could offset the capital-intensive nature of manufacturing. Partnering with financial institutions. The company reportedly eyed captive finance programs in emerging markets, offering bundled machinery plus credit packages that could be priced to account for tariff-driven cost fluctuations. Yet these initiatives required upfront investment in digital infrastructure, credit risk management systems, and local finance teams' capabilities that the U.S. tariff squeeze had already strained. Behind the scenes, internal cultural frictions came to light. Long-tenured employees, steeped in the tradition of U.S. manufacturing excellence, reportedly chafed at remote management of overseas plants. European and Asian managers, in turn, pressed for greater autonomy, arguing that different market dynamics and labor relations called for tailored production approaches. Case IH's human resources and organizational development team reportedly scrambled to bridge these divides, launching cross-border leadership rotations and virtual collaboration platforms. The hope was to foster a unified corporate identity that transcended geographic boundaries even as production footprints shifted. But forging such a culture required time and deliberate effort, and time was in short supply amid quarterly revenue targets and looming inventory constraints. In the agricultural community, equipment auctions began to show interesting patterns. As U.S. farmers delayed new purchases in hopes of post-shutdown deals, or government relief, used Case IH tractors and combines filtered into secondary markets. Prices for late-model machines held surprisingly firm, reflecting both farmers' continued demand for proven equipment and dealers' reluctance to liquidate inventory at fire sale prices. Yet further down the depreciation curve, values for older units plummeted, stranding some operators with assets worth significantly less than expected. This bifurcation in resale values prompted debates among farm advisors about the optimal timing for equipment turnover, balancing the costs of maintenance and downtime against the risks of obsolescence and tariff-driven price inflation on new machines. As planting season approached in both hemispheres, dealers and distributors faced a delicate balancing act, securing enough inventory to meet peak demand while avoiding overstock should the supply chain recover faster or slower than anticipated. Some established pre-booking systems requiring farmers to place deposits months in advance, a controversial move that strained cash flows for smaller operations. Others, lacking sufficient new equipment, pivoted to upselling service contracts and parts kits, betting that equipment uptime would become paramount for farmers navigating uncertain delivery schedules. In these negotiations, the specter of future tariffs lingered, as did the possibility of renegotiated trade agreements which could tilt the calculus once again. On the diplomatic front, the United States engaged in intense negotiations with key trading partners. Agricultural attachés, trade representatives, and presidential envoys convened in Geneva, Tokyo, and Brussels, seeking to defuse the tit-for-tat tariff war before more sectors succumb to protectionist spirals. Case IH's predicament served as a high-profile example of collateral damage, and industry coalitions lobbied for carve-outs specific to agricultural machinery inputs. Nonetheless, while some temporary exemptions were granted for humanitarian or food security reasons, comprehensive rollbacks proved elusive. The political will to back down from tariffs in the broader context of trade policy as a geopolitical lever reportedly remained limited. Within CNH Industrial's leadership ranks the mood grew increasingly strategic. The company's CEO reportedly convened a task force to develop a future of manufacturing blueprint, an ambitious document outlining scenarios for deglobalized production, hyper-automated lights-out factories, and fully digital supply chain orchestration. This blueprint reportedly recognized that the shocks inflicted by Trump-era tariffs might be the first of many in a world grappling with shifting power, balances, resource nationalism, and climate-driven disruptions. To navigate these uncertainties, Case IH envisioned a distributed manufacturing model, where microfactories located near major markets could produce modules that were then assembled on-site or shipped just in time. Such a model promised resilience against both policy swings and natural disasters, but demanded a radical overhaul of existing processes, supplier relations, and IT systems. Reflecting on the unfolding saga, agricultural leaders pondered a deeper truth. The equipment that farmers counted on to feed the world had reportedly become inextricably tied to geopolitical forces beyond their fields. The diesel-humming tractors and combine harvesters traced their lineage to advanced metallurgy, global logistics planning, and multinational financing structures. When any one of these links snapped, whether by tariffs, pandemics, or logistical bottlenecks, the entire system trembled. Case IH's repositioning thus became emblematic of a broader decoupling trend in which supply chains segmented along political lines, reducing efficiency but enhancing strategic autonomy. For farmers, this reality meant navigating a landscape where the cost and availability of machinery would no longer be solely dictated by agricultural cycles but by the vagaries of statecraft. International development agencies, wary of the destabilizing potential in emerging economies, began assessing the need for buffer stocks of critical farm equipment and spare parts. The World Bank and regional development banks initiated discussions on funding equipment pools that could be leased or shared among farming cooperatives, insulating them from sudden price spikes or delivery delays. Such programs aimed not only to stabilize production, but to foster resilience in the face of a world where trade volatility had become a constant companion. For Case IH and its peers, participation in these programs offered both a social license benefit and a means to maintain market presence even as traditional sales channels wavered. In board meetings and agricultural conferences worldwide, the lessons from Case IH's upheaval reportedly crystallized into common themes: the importance of supply chain agility, the need for diversified revenue streams, and the imperative of aligning corporate strategy with geopolitical realities. Companies began to embed trade policy risk assessments into every facet of planning, from R&D location choices to capital allocation decisions. Some firms even established dedicated geoeconomic teams tasked with monitoring policy shifts and modeling their financial impacts in real time. This new discipline, part finance, part political science, sought to anticipate the next tariff cycle or regional conflict that could compromise critical inputs. As the calendar turned to the next fiscal year, signs of stabilization began to emerge. Case IH's relocated production lines achieved initial ramp rates close to projections, and the first tractors assembled in Europe and Asia rolled off new lines destined for export markets. Margins in international divisions showed incremental improvement, and early adopters reported quality metrics on par with U.S.-built units. Yet the fruits of these efforts reportedly remained out of reach for American customers until domestic production could resume or until tariff relief delivered lower prices. In board presentations, executives emphasized the long-term view that short-term disruptions were the price of ensuring the company's survival and competitiveness in a fracturing global economy. Amid all these transformations, the human element endured. Former Case IH factory workers, some retrained for roles in robotics maintenance or logistics coordination, found new paths in adjacent industries. Others remained skeptical, their livelihoods having been uprooted by forces beyond their control. Agricultural communities rallied to support displaced families, while technical schools expanded curricula to prepare students for the changing landscape of advanced manufacturing. In this way, the story of Case IH's factory closures became not only a corporate saga, but a catalyst for regional adaptation and renewal. The shutdown of U.S. plants and the shift abroad did more than reshape Case IH's cost structure. It reframed the conversation around the intertwined nature of commerce policy and the fundamental mission of feeding a growing world. By exposing vulnerabilities in even the most established supply chains, the episode compelled farmers, policymakers, and companies to confront a new reality. In that reality, access to the tractors and combines that tilled fields and harvested crops would be governed as much by geopolitics as by engineering prowess. And as stakeholders across continents absorbed these lessons, one truth stood out in an era defined by uncertainty. Resilience would be the most valuable commodity of all.